Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. We have been trying to cover the Sermon on the Mount before we move on with Jesus' ministry. We have talked about the structure of the Jewish writing, where the meat of the issue is in the middle, and the first part builds up to that, and the latter part kind of gives application and slides away from it. But the crust of the subject is in the middle. You've heard it said, but I tell you, and you've heard it said, but I tell you, and you've heard it said, but I tell you. We're in the part now where we're pulling away from that. Jesus is offering us application to a lot of these things that he's talked about, a lot of these things that he's advised us about, and a lot of these things he's tried to make clear to us. He starts out with, and we talked about this last year, our fasting and prayer being a gift to us to improve our spiritual life and our relationship with God. It is not a tool to gain social status, or a tool to have importance in the synagogue, or a tool for whatever man might want to use it for. But it's a gift. It's a place where we can take our time and grow spiritually closer to our Creator. And that's a wonderful gift. It's a wonderful gift, and we need to exercise it. Find a time of the day to do it. He tells us, that we need to be looking at treasures in heaven rather than earth. That's a real easy thing to say, and we got it all when we were 3, and with little felt figures learning how to do it. But it's a really important issue. And everything he goes on from here almost to the end of this has to do with where our treasures are. He says that our eyes are the lamp of our body. And he goes on to say, he goes into a lot of detail about that, but the point being that, and we talked last week too, you can't do anything that you haven't considered first. And you can't consider anything that you hadn't looked at first. Our eyes are the source of most of our temptation. Our eyes are the source of most of the things that pull us away from God. Our eyes are the source of how we interpret the people around us. Our eyes can be so much. We can see so much beauty. We can see so many good things that we could do or need to do, and lead our bodies to do those things. But we need to be very careful that we don't let our eyes lead us in the wrong direction. God will furnish everything we need. We see things we want. We think we need to go get that. We also know there's things we need to be doing and should be doing that we don't, because we're busy going after these other things. And God says, don't worry. Don't worry. And he does this several times. This is the first time that he really says, don't worry. Stop it. There's nothing you need that God's not gonna provide. And he goes through his little analogies with the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and how they're so richly blessed, and we're so much more important to God than these things are. He's saying, just don't do it, because that, once more, is a thing that says, where are your values? I told you when we started that most of the rest of this sermon was about the things we seek after, the things that are our values. He's saying, don't worry, don't look at those things, because that reflects where your values are. If you're focused on God, and if you're focused on the body, and if you're focused on discipleship, which is our purpose, then all these other things are going to be by the side. He's going to tell the apostles later when he sends them out the same things. The same things. But he also goes on to tell us that as we're going through this, even though we need to be loving and we need to be kind and we need to be all those things, we also need to avoid judging. It says, as you judge, you will be judged. But he uses more, stories there to tell us about the speck in your neighbor's eye and the beam in your eye and that sort of thing. And those things are obvious to us that if we think at all, that we know the problems we have inside should get a lot more attention than the problems I perceive in you. And the big thing is, if I have perceived those problems in you, why am I judging you? Why am I looking at that? He tells us, you're going to be taken care of. Don't worry about these things. Don't judge. And then he says, after all these little attributes we learned about, and he's telling us how to do them, he says, don't give what's holy to curs. Don't cast your pearls among swine. This is right at the end of the part about not judging. Now, how do we figure out that we got a swine or a cur? You say we have to judge?
Yeah, we say we make an assessment.
Make an assessment.
It's a nursing term.
Both here and elsewhere, he's going to tell us that we need to be shrewd. We need to be observant, that we need to discern. Mostly he's going to tell us that we need to, when somebody's coming in, we need to be checking the fruit crop, because it's not so much what they say or what they promise, but what they do that really matters. Tells us nothing we need is going to be withheld from us. Nothing we want is going to be denied if it's something that's incongruent with who we are. And whatever we look for, he's going to help us find it. Hopefully we're looking for him in what we do. I like the analogy about what kind of father would give his kid a snake if he asked for bread. I did that once with one of my little girls. I gave her a worm. It wasn't a snake. She was looking for a treat, and I just happened to be in the garden. I thought it was funny at the time, but she still remembers that. Never thought it was funny. Never thought it was funny. But what kind of a father does intentionally give something awful to a child? You can't. And if you're a parent, and most of us in here are parents, that's just out of the question. There's lots of routes. There's lots of ways to get somewhere. There's lots of wide diversions and wide attractions and wide directions that we could go. But where we're pointed and where we need to be going is a very narrowly focused thing, the narrow route. And he points that out to us. He tells us that be careful. The world's going to show you a lot of distractions. I think what he really was saying was don't turn on the TV. Leave it alone. The world will show you a lot of distractions and a lot of things that look like I need to find time for that, when you can't find time for what we talked about when we first started, that little minute of being together and exercising that closeness to God and building a relationship with him. Expanding on the be discerning part, don't throw your pearls in front of pigs. He tells us to be careful of false prophets. He tells us we can identify them by their fruits. He says the same thing about false disciples, that there are people in our midst that are just here because there's something they want other than God. They're here for whatever purpose they can find. They may not really be devoted to being disciples. And yet, there's always the production of what they do. We don't have to judge. We don't have to do anything. We just have to simply observe and know who we're dealing with. The whole capsule of all this is thrown together in the thing we all learned in Bible school. And we don't sing the song, Wise Man Builds His House. No, let's don't sing it. You guys don't look like you're into singing this early. That's kind of. The whole thing is brought together, and the people that hear this and do this, they're going to build their house, they're going to build their life, they're going to build their whole future on a foundation that's on the rock. You dig down, you plant your foot on the solid spot, and build off that. And he gives you all the tools to do it with. Jesus leaves this sermon, which I know we just went through it, I know we talked about it. Stop and just read Matthew 5, 7, 8, and try not to look at all those things that people have put in the middle there where they break it up and they put chapter numbers and verse numbers. Just try to read it like Jesus had just written you a letter. Read it through. Don't stop at the pauses that man put in there. It would be one of the best sermons you ever heard or read. It is the best sermon you could ever hear or read. But he gives that. He leaves all these people. He's got this crowd, and he's coming down off the mountain, all these followers. And what's the first thing that Matthew reports? Now, Mark and Luke have different sequence of events. It's hard to tell. I think a lot of the things we hear specifically from Matthew and a little different from Matthew are because Matthew is a Jew writing about a Jew to Jews. And he's telling the Jews what's going to convince them that this man is the Messiah. So if it's a little different, if he gives you a few different details, that's the audience he's trying to talk to. And he's trying to use the parts that make that work. But the first thing that happens when he comes down is a leper approaches him. Matthew handles that in about one paragraph, but the volume of that is much greater. A leper is a social outcast. A leper associates with lepers. A leper is someone that once the priest have said, unclean skin disease, go out of the outside the camp, they are never touched, usually for the rest of their life, by a human being. They don't come. They don't approach people. This leper comes up to Jesus and says, if you're willing, you can heal me. See that? Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. It's not, can you take care of this skin disease? I'm just hoping you can do it. It was, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. What did Jesus do? He touched him. Think real hard about the crowd that's watching this and their reaction to Jesus reaching out and touching this man. They're thinking Jesus is going to be unclean. But with Jesus, it worked just the other way. His cleanliness was spread forth to the leopard, and the leopard was healed immediately. Leper. I called him a leopard, didn't I? He was a leper. I'm not getting a lot of sleep lately. We're stuck here. I'm not through with this, but Jesus is going to go through a series of 10 major miracles here and a host of other miracles that aren't even, they're mentioned as sidelines. But in the next two chapters, he's going through 10 major miracles, and he's doing it for the purpose of showing the Jew that this man is the Messiah. He's showing the Jew here with the leper that Jesus is not the subject of the law, but he is the law. He is the source of the law. He is the Word incarnate. And when he reaches out and touches this guy and heals him, it's just like, what's going to happen now? Jesus says, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. And you've heard people say that Jesus tells him not to tell anybody because it's not time yet, doesn't want to stir anything up. He's been up the hill stirring stuff up. It's not about that. It's because this man, Jesus has created controversy with the priest who diagnosed this man as a leper, and he's telling this man, go to the priest, right straight forthwith. Go to the priest, make your sacrifices, and get your diagnoses cleansed before they decide to take this out on me and you don't get your social life back and you don't get your complete cleansing. And it's recognized, go down there and get them before they get an opportunity to make a political issue out of this. Get cleansed and get going. He's concerned about the leper. His compassion to reach out and touch this man was just unbelievable in the context. His compassion to stop this from being spread so the man can go on through with the priest and his ritual cleansing just continues. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately was cleansed. See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, now I don't know how far that was, but we're gonna assume it was a fair stroll. But when he got into Capernaum, it said that he was approached by a centurion. And Mark and Luke say that the centurion sent somebody to approach him. He didn't actually approach him himself. But it's okay, because that's not the point. The point is that the centurion, Lord, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus says, well, I'll come take care of it. He says, there's no reason for that. There's no reason for you to go to my house to do that, because first of all, you're a Jew. You're not supposed to be going into my house anyway. I know you'd do it, but I'm not going to put you through that. You don't need to do that. Mark and Luke point out, too, that he didn't feel like he needed to come to Jesus. He sent somebody. Here, he says, you don't need to go because you're in charge. I'm in charge of things. You tell it to happen, it'll happen. I know that if I tell my people to do something, it gets done. So Jesus says, truly, I tell you, I've not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects in the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Go, let it be done just as you believed. His servant was healed. These first two miracles, I think, deserve the bulk of our attention. And I'm saying that because our attention span is rapidly waning here. This man's faith is, do we have that kind of faith? Do we have the kind of faith that just says, I don't need anything special, you just say the word and I know you'll take care of it? Don't worry, hey, God, hey, by the way, there's a problem over here and I need you to fix it because it's not getting worked out. Anybody ever exercise their faith that way? Well, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I have had occasion where that was the only route I had. I didn't have any other way of making life come together. And I just had to fall on my face and say, fix it. I can do nothing. It works. I'm not going to go into my details, but I will tell you that I'm sure some of you here have had similar details. But I will tell you that it works. That God does care about us. And that our faith is the whole power of our discipleship. It's everything we've got. Nothing else matters or amounts to anything, folks. Our faith in Christ, in God, that's the rock. couple of people, right after this, he goes to Peter's house, and there wasn't anything to eat, so he healed Peter's mother-in-law to fix some food. You know, a lot of people do make light of that. Lee, I'm sorry I was using the handkerchief again. She's watching, by the way. A lot of people do make light of the fact that he healed her and she got up and waited on him. I don't think that's the point of the thing. The point of the thing is it was an incidental thing. He's there, something needed to happen, and God provided. There were things to do besides tend to a sick person, so he provided. Let's get to where we can talk about it. And right after that, the whole community comes in, the entire community, everybody's around. Said he healed every illness, took care of all these problems, fixed everything. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet, that was Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and he bore our diseases. And he did. I don't know how long he was there with them, but when he left, there were some people that wanted to go with. There was a scribe, a teacher of the law, or a student of the law. It depends on what version you read, it's how they describe him, that said, I'll follow you anywhere. And another man that said, wait just a minute, let me go bury my father, and I want to follow you too. These people are mentioned so that we'll understand the gravity. The gravity of following Jesus is, he's homeless, folks. He's got no place to lay his head. If you're going to follow him, you don't know where you're going to wind up going. If you're really following him, you may be led into things that you don't want to get into. And you need to be able to say, there's nothing else in my life that matters more than following you. Now, the term this guy used sounds pretty harsh. Let me bury my father first, but that was a Jewish social thing. They were obliged to take care of their parents until they were gone, and then they had to bury him. His father may not have even been dead or close to death. It was like, let me take care of my obligation with my family, and then I want to do what you're doing. No. Nope. Whatever obligation you have with your family comes along, but we're going, and you got to follow, and you're going to do what we do and where we go. There's no putting anything between you and following Jesus. Now, that sounds hard, I know, because there may be a ball game this afternoon, and we may not be able to get back for the evening service or whatever. So, you know, there's some things. No, there's not. It's amazing to me that just after this incident, Matthew records that they went back across the lake again, and Jesus went to sleep, and the storm came up, and the apostle says, oh, no, we're going to drown. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, oh, ye of little faith. Just be still, be calm. And here's the amazing part to me, is the apostles were amazed. They just watched all this other stuff. And now Matthew points out, not only is he in charge of all those things, but he's also in charge of the wind and the waves. And somehow we find that amazing. And somehow we can sit here and say, how could the apostles possibly find that amazing? But this afternoon, when the little tornado sirens go off, you may have a better understanding of why the apostles found it amazing. But he can. He can calm the winds and the waves. When he gets to the other side of the lake, Mark and Luke describe an encounter with a man and focus their story on a man that was filled with demons and breaking chains and filled with legions of demons. Matthew skims it a little bit. He says, he comes over there and there's a couple of guys come out of the caves, and I'll tell you that the little researching I've done on this situation is that homeless people tended to live in the tombs because they were shelter and they were open. So there was probably several or a lot of people that were finding their camp in these caves because of their life situation. But Matthew talks about two of them that came out. And he doesn't really talk about a lot of conversation between the man and Jesus, whereas Mark and Luke focus on that because they're focusing on the salvation of this guy and how it worked for him and how great it was. What's Matthew trying to do? Matthew has already established power over illness. He's power over the wind and the waves, power over so many things. Now he's showing the Jew that he also has power over demons. And that's his point. And that's why he skims through this. That's why he throws that out there so quickly. All the versions you read indicate that the demons left and on begging to leave and be thrown into the swine. And there's a lot of conversation between Jesus and the demon-possessed man in the other two versions. In this version, there's only one word. Jesus only uttered one syllable for this whole occasion. Go. That's all it took. That's all he needed to do because he did have power over Satan and over Satan's demons. The whole town was pretty upset. Anybody got any ideas why they were upset? This is a real question because I've wavered back and forth on this. Sometimes I think they were hacked off because their economy got chopped pretty good with the pigs. Sometimes, yes.
These had to have been non-Jews, because Jews wouldn't have been.
These were Gentiles, you're right. This was the other side of the lake. This was over in getting towards the Decapolis, out in that area out in the wilderness and out through there. So these were Gentiles. They hadn't witnessed all this other stuff. They hadn't been expecting a Messiah. Their mom and dads hadn't raised them on a knee singing about the Messiah to them. They were scared, guys. There was a powerful entity at work that they didn't understand. They've been dealing with these demon-possessed folks in the caves for who knows how long. And this guy comes out and says, what? Go. It might have been go, whatever. It was just one syllable. Go. They were powerless to do anything but what he said to do. They asked not to go into the abyss, but they went into the pigs, and the pigs took them into the abyss anyway. Matthew's got a few more miracles to tell us specifically about for specific reasons. He says that Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over to his own town again. Now, I'm assuming that's Capernaum, because Nazareth was too far away, and he'd already been thrown out of Nazareth by this time anyway. To his own town, some men brought to him a paralyzed man lying on a mat, couldn't get there himself. Somebody brought him to him. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." Well, why did he do that? Do you not think he was totally aware of the fact that these scribes were watching him? Because they were. If you didn't think he was aware of the fact they were watching him, he was aware of what they were thinking. And he confronted it because they were sitting there. It just says they were thinking, they said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." the way we see people is a lot of trouble for us, a lot of trouble for the people that were following Jesus, and a lot of trouble for these guys too. They saw a threat. They had a discerning and frightened eye that saw the threat that Jesus was to their way of life. And they're thinking, no, he's blaspheming. Jesus says, why do you think these things? Why is it that you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? That's a good question, guys. Why is it that we entertain evil thoughts in our hearts? Oh, I'm the only one that does that. Is there anybody else? Nobody else entertains evil thoughts in their hearts?
I think we're letting Satan get into our hearts too much whenever we do not concentrate on what Jesus wants us to do regarding different things.
And it says that we're letting Satan control our hearts, that we're letting the world control our hearts, or the prince of this world control how we look at things. If our little domain is threatened, then these guys' domain was being threatened a little bit. If our domain is threatened, we're going to find something to put us on righteous ground and make that threat the evil enemy. And that's what they're doing here. This guy's blaspheming. So Jesus says, just so you'll know, guys, is it easier to say your sins are forgiven or take up your mat and walk? And then he tells the guy, get up, pick up your mat, go home. And he did. The crowd saw this and they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to man. Later, we're going to find out that that wasn't the reaction that the scribes had. They had other thoughts other than awe. I think it was fear, actually. And this is the part where Matthew reports that Jesus called him. Up to now, the things Matthew is telling you are things that he's heard from the other disciples, things that's been reported to him. Now Matthew's saying, hey, he walked into the marketplace, found the tax guy at the table, and said, hey, come and follow me, Matthew. And he did, and guess what else he did? He went to eat at Matthew's house, and guess what else they did? They brought in a bunch of other tax collectors and sinners, and Jesus spent the evening with all these vermin, you know? Ooh, bad people. I like to get my neighborhood together. Y'all ever do that? Just do something to... Christmas is a good time because everybody's looking for a party anyway, waiting for one to happen somewhere. So we'll usually just send out invitations around the neighborhood or an email around the neighborhood and say, hey, everybody come over. We got a big pot of cocoa and some brownies, and let's celebrate the holiday coming in. And we get together and we talk. And one of the things we talk about is our relationships with each other and our relationships with Jesus. Always a good time to slip in like tell me about your spiritual life. What do y'all do? Where do you go? Guys, these scribes said, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? The disciples didn't answer. Jesus answered. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Guys, go study your scripture and try to understand what God is trying to tell you. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. When John's disciples came and asked him about how come you and your disciples don't fast, Jesus was quick to respond, and I'll just read it. How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he's with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. Then they'll fast. No one sews a patch on unshrunk cloth, takes a patch of unshrunk cloth onto an old garment. For the patch will pull away in the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst. The wine will run out of the wineskins and be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. I've got a new message. I got a new way of doing things. I've got a whole new wine that doesn't fit into the religious structure that you guys have created. God didn't really put it together this way. You guys have put it together this way. And the wine I've got to pour in there doesn't fit into that. There's some of you that are going to be able to see it. There's some of you that are going to be able to accept it and embrace it. But you know who's going to be more receptive? This new audience over here. These new garments, these new wineskins. They're going to hear it. They're going to understand it. And they're going to see a mercy that they never thought was available to them and be glad to have it. Same feast, according to Matthew, a synagogue leader, Mark and Luke say Jairus. Synagogue leader comes, and according to the other description, he sent someone, a messenger, but there's a lot of little differences. And I will tell you, most of the time, if you look at it, you can see that it depends on what he's trying to convey, what he's trying to say with all this. We're about to run out of time, Steve, and it's getting close. We're going to be almost there. Anyway, Jairus comes and says, hey, my daughter has just died. This guy came and says, just died. The other guy says, the messenger said, she's dying. But later on the way, somebody else comes in the other versions and says, she's dead. Don't waste your time. Stay here. But this guy says she's dying, and Jesus got up and went with him. And so did his disciples. Everybody went with him. But on the way, he felt some power go out of him. And he turned. There was a lady who had been ill for years, for a long time, that said she thought that if she could just, she knew that if she could just touch the hem of his garment, that she'd be healed. She knew it, and she was. And Jesus told her it was what that healed her? Her faith. What healed the centurion's servant? His faith. His faith. When do you see your prayers answered the most? When you have faith. When you have faith that he's going to take care of you. They're always answered. They may just not be what you want to hear. But when Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd, this was after the incident in the street, a lot of people following him around. Just because we know that because this lady had to push through the crowd to get to touch his hem. Crowd, people playing pipes. Funeral. Said, go away. Girl's not dead, she's just sleeping. Go away. They laughed at him, but they left. He told them to leave. After they left, he touched her hand and she got up. And they told it all over the territory. In fact, Matthew reports a lot that they tell everything all over the territory. We're getting towards the end of these miracles, and I know we're just breezing through them really quick. But he's going to do a blind man and then a demon-possessed mute, or two blind men. Two blind men followed him as he was leaving the dead girl. This is the same evening, I guess. Calling out, have mercy on us, son of David. Now, they couldn't see him. Have mercy on us, son of David. They couldn't see him. but they knew he was close. And when he had gone indoors, the blind men followed him indoors. Now, I'm not sure where indoors was. It's kind of a non-specific indoors here. But the blind man came to him and he asked him, "Do you believe that I'm able to do that or do this?" "Yes." "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. And Jesus warned them sternly, "Don't tell anybody." But these guys didn't go straight to the priest. These guys told everybody. And it went around everywhere. And while they were going out from there, another guy comes in, demon possessed, and he's mute. He can't speak. He drove the demon out. And the crowd, it says, was amazed. Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, it's by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. Matthew doesn't have Jesus confront that right here, but we're going to later. Jesus went on through the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good word of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field." Jesus has an answer for that in 10, and we're running over, so we're going to have to stop. I was hoping to get into 10 today, but we'll get it next week, Steve, I promise. We are the workers, guys. There is a harvest field, and it is